Hello and welcome to a new episode of Adobe Creative Cloud TV. My name is Terry White. In this episode, we're going to take a look at how to get started with Adobe Illustrator, 10 things beginners want to know how to do. So first and foremost, if you're an expert Illustrator user, then chances are this is not your video. But if you're just getting started, you've never touched Illustrator before, or maybe you've started, but you kind of really would like to get some foundation and know how to get going further, then this is for you. What I'm doing is I'm taking the 10 things that people ask the most about Illustrator when they're first starting out, and we're going to kind of condense this as much as we can into a video that will, take the gloves off, make it easier for you to jump right in and start using Illustrator. Now, there's a couple things right off the bat. First of all, I am using a tablet. A tablet makes using Illustrator and Photoshop much, much easier. It's not required. You can, of course, use your mouse. The program works and fully functional without a tablet. But if you use a drawing tablet, for example, I have a Wacom Intuos Pro here, and I am working on a Cintiq, which is their larger display-based tablet. It will make life easier because instead of using a mouse, you're using a stylus to draw and do things a lot more accurately. Like I said, not required, but certainly will make your life easier. So when you see me pick up the pen, it's because I need to do something more intricate. So now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right in and see how to use Illustrator CC. The first thing that people need to know how to do is once you launch it, once you've installed it, by the way, I want you to go into your apps in your Creative Cloud application and make sure Illustrator is actually up to date. If not, go ahead and apply the updates. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and dive into the first thing, which is creating a new document. So you have File, New, and New from Template. New from Template is actually an older command where you would maybe pick an image to start with that you're going to trace on top of. So we're just going to jump right in and say New. Now, New is where you would give it the document name. So I'm going to say Intro to AI for Illustrator CC. See, there we go. And then you have a profile. Now you can choose print, for example, and print will set it up for the most common print sizes. So you have presets for letter, legal, tabloid, A4, so forth and so on. And you can work in points, picas, inches, for example, is what I prefer, millimeters, so forth and so on. Now, what's this whole print thing for? Well, you notice that it sets the color mode to CMYK, which is the most common for color separations. And then any raster effects or pixel-based data that it has to deal with, it's going to do it pretty highly at 300 pixels per inch, which is common for printing. And that will set you up for a great print experience. But what if you're creating a document or creating a logo that's going to be used for more than one thing? Well, you could start with print. That's going to keep it CMYK for nice color separated print documents. And you could still use that logo on other places such as the web or on mobile devices. But if you knew you were going to use it only on the web or start out with a web graphic for your website, then if you choose web, you'll notice that it changes the size to screen sizes. So 800 by 600, 1024 by 768, 1280 by 800. And of course, you can type in whatever custom one you want. You'll notice that it also changes the color mode to RGB instead of CMYK. And changes the raster effects down to 72 ppi for a lower resolution screen. But more importantly, this is fairly new, is that it adds the Align New Objects to Pixel Grid option by default, which means you'll get crisper corners, crisper non-anti-aliased graphics on the web. So that's a great new addition to Illustrator. And of course, we can keep going. We can say we're building something for a device, such as an iPad. We're making a startup screen for our app. So it will give me all these various tablet and phone sizes. Or we could say that we're doing for video and film, and it will give me all these nice standard def and high definition resolutions for working with film. Maybe you're creating a logo that's going to be animated in After Effects, or a lower third for your video in Premiere. So these are all nice presets to get going. I'm going to go ahead and switch to web, and I'll leave it on the default 960 by 560. And that's number one, how to create your new document. Number two deals with artboards. Artboards is Illustrator's way, for lack of a better way of saying, multiple pages. We don't call it multiple pages because, for example, if I'm doing something for a web design, those aren't pages. Those are different logos or different things for my different websites. So that's why we don't use the generic term of pages, because not everything in Illustrator is going to print. However, think of it, if you need to, as multiple pages for print. And so if I say make 2 artboards, it will now activate the artboard settings for 2, 3, 5, 10, whatever artboard you want. So now when I click OK, that will create my 2 artboards that are identical in size. I can use the artboard tool to click on an artboard, and then I can go in and resize that artboard manually. I could change it to be tall, for example, instead of wide. I can pick it up and move it anywhere I want in front of the other artboard. And I can also use presets. So for example, if I'm making one that's specifically for a certain size or certain screen, I can do that as well. So an iPad mini, that would be an iPad mini screen size. So there you are. You have the ability to go in and create these multiple artboards, pages, whatever you like to call them. And as a last tip here, you can use the artboards panel, because once you have more than a few, you might forget which one's which. You can go in and double click and say that my main artboard is going to be for the web or website, and my second artboard is going to be for my smartphone. So you make them whatever you need them to be, and now those artboards will be referenced. When you double click, it will actually take you to that artboard, and you can work full screen on that artboard. So now that was number 2, working with multiple artboards. Number 3, and probably the most commonly requested thing, is how to work with shapes. So you have shape tools in Illustrator. You have the rectangle. If you hold down the rectangle, you'll have rounded rectangle, ellipse, polygon, star, and the flare tool. The rectangle tool and ellipse are probably the 2 most common ones that people use to make shapes, but you can use any one of these. Illustrator has had for a long time this side benefit of working with multiple tools, is that if I know I'm going to be switching back and forth between these a lot, then what I can do is just simply click this button over here on the right hand side that will tear this off and make it a small floating panel. You can do that with any of the tools that are here that have multiple tools underneath them. You can tear it off and make it a panel. Then when you want to get rid of it, just click the little X to put it away and tear it off again if you ever need it again. So I'm going to keep it open because we're going to work with a couple of different shapes. Now, when I want to draw a shape, I can do it like one of maybe 2 or 3 ways. One, I can just go ahead and just simply drag out a rectangle. Okay, that's what I expect. Number 2, I can simply drag out another rectangle, but if I hold down my Shift key, I'm constraining it to a perfect square. So it will not be a rectangle, it will be a square instead. Number 3, if I click, then I can type in the dimensions for that rectangle. So if I needed that rectangle to be exactly 230 pixels by 230 pixels, that will give me a perfect square at 230 pixels. So you can go in and you can use these shapes any one of those 3 ways. Drag it out, hold down the Shift key, constrain it, click to type in your exact dimensions. Now, if you want to manipulate the shapes themselves, then you go back to your selection tool, and now you can pick these up and move them around as objects. That's the difference between working with vector shapes in Illustrator versus with painting in Photoshop. Because once you paint on the background, you're not going to easily pick up that paint stroke and move it around unless you proactively made a layer first. Whereas in Illustrator, whether you make layers first or not, every object is its own separate object that you can pick up and move around. So, working with shapes. Now, the next one is, and for example, just so you see that, yes, you can work with this ellipse as an ellipse, or hold down the Shift key and get a perfect circle. You'll notice that the other thing is that these are all now stacking on top of each other in the order I drew them in. So the first rectangle is on the bottom, the next one's above it, the next one's above it, the ellipse is above that, and the circle's last. You can control this stacking order just by simply arranging the objects. So if I click on the very first rectangle I drew, and I go to my object menu, I can say arrange, bring to front, meaning bring it to the foremost object on top of everything else. So now it's on top in the stacking order. That's kind of a bonus thing just because I know people will want to know how to do that at some point. But your objects are always drawn on top of each other, even if they're not touching each other, in the order you drew them in. So since the circle was last, it would be on top of the ellipse. And now that the rectangle's on top of everything else, even if I move it over here, it's still on top of everything else in the stacking order. So Illustrator is always keeping track of that. The next one we're going to work with is working with paths, lines, and brushes. So for example, if I want to now create a line, well, I have a couple of ways of doing that. The original way would be to use the pen tool. The pen tool is used for drawing freeform lines and curves. So the way I would draw a line is it's going to seem silly once you see the next tool, but the way I would draw a line is click, and then hold down the Shift key if I want a perfectly straight line, and click away from it. And that will give me a perfectly straight line. If I don't want it to be perfectly straight, then I can click. Oh, actually, let's undo that. Let's deselect it first. Let's make a new one. Click, and then click somewhere else, and that will make a line that's not perfectly straight. Now, that's 2 clicks just to make a line. The pen tool can make lines, but that's really not what it's geared for. What it's really geared for is drawing or tracing around irregular shapes that are both lines and curves. So for example, I can click, or drag to get a curve. And I can drag to get another curve. And I can drag to get another curve. And I can click to get a line. And I can click to get another line. And I can join that together. So everywhere I clicked, it made a point, whether it was a curve point or a corner point. These are corner points on the end, curve points along the way. And those points can be manipulated with your direct selection tool. So if I want to click on this point and move it around, I can. If I want to change the direction or shape of that curve, I can use the handles that are on that curve point to do it with. So there you are, kind of a weird looking backwards, maybe Nike kind of looking logo. But you get the idea. If you were a little bit more proficient and patient, you could actually get the exact shape that you wanted using the pen tool. So the pen tool was always designed for just that. And I've got a great tutorial on how to use the pen tool on my YouTube channel if you want to know more about the pen tool. Next up, of course, is what if you just want to draw a line? Well, instead of using the pen tool, guess what? Here's a great line tool. That's exactly what it's for. If you just want to draw a line, just drag. You want to hold down the Shift and draw a perfect line, you can. So if I were going to draw a line, I'd probably do it with the line tool before I'd use the pen tool. Now, so we've done lines and curves. What about freeform drawing? The pencil tool was my first choice back in the day of drawing freeform because it just really let me draw freeform as opposed to having to mathematically do it with the pen tool. So I could go in, for example, and I could do a squiggle. I could draw kind of my own little circle there. I could start to sign my name if I want it. The pencil tool is great, and using it with a stylus is even better. But let's go in and let's look at some of the attributes of the pencil tool itself. So for example, if I kind of draw a shape and I don't like it, one of the things I always loved about the pencil tool is that you can draw on the original shape you just made and reshape it. That's right, I love that. So if you kind of want to refine it, you can keep refining it a little bit more to kind of get it around or in the shape that you wanted it to be. So pencil tool that way is fantastic. Now the pencil tool and the line tools and the pen tools are all drawing what are called strokes. We're going to get into fills and strokes on the next one, but those are all just strokes. They're not like the squares and circles that are fillable objects. The next one, which is the blob brush, that's right, B-L-O-B, blob brush, gives me the best of both worlds. It lets me draw freeform like the pencil tool, but more importantly, it's actually letting me draw with a closed object. So if I select that with my direct selection tool, for example, we'll see that we have a path going around the black that is a fillable object. So I can fill it with whatever color, pattern, gradient, whatever I want to use. So that's the difference between using the regular line tools, pen tools, and using the blob brush. The only one we haven't covered yet is the paint brush tool. And if I go to the paintbrush tool and I go to my brushes panel, there are some cool brushes that we can use. For example, I can use this kind of brush here. And this brush looks more like a pixel-based or a hand-drawn stroke, but it is vector. So I can go ahead and make that thicker, actually. Select it first. There we go. I can make that thicker and kind of see what that's really doing. So we have all these brushes. Of course, there are just a few that come in by default, but you can go into your brush libraries and you can open up a library of all kinds of different things. So for example, I can open up decorative banners and seals. And if I need a banner, oops, not out of that one, but let's go ahead and make a banner. And let's make it not 14 points anymore. And let's go ahead and use our brush and draw a banner. So banners can be drawn using the banner brush. Now you'll notice that, here we'll close this. You notice that this one is a pattern. So we can go in and draw a pattern-based shape that just repeats and looks like a pattern. You can go in and use that pattern to fill other objects, or stroke other objects, I should say. So I can say, go ahead and do that as well. So these are cool to be able to use. These are cool things to do with brushes. New in Illustrator CC, we have one more new brush option, and that is image brushes. So if I open up the image brush library, the difference is these are not vector. These are actually things that were drawn or photographed, I should say, and brought in as pixel images. And then we can now go in and use those. Here, let's do it this way. We can use those as brushes for our artwork. So you can go in, you can take a photograph, drag it into the brushes panel, and make it a brush now. So pretty cool to be able to do this, and this is all using all of the kind of path-based drawing tools. So now we've spent a lot of time on strokes and, paths, lines, and brushes. Now let's get into strokes and fills. So for example, let's go back. Let's go ahead and draw, here we'll do a rounded rectangle here. And that rounded rectangle comes in as, in this case, with no fill and a black stroke. So if we look at this over here on the left-hand side, that line going through the fill means it's not filled with anything, it's hollow. And the black on the stroke means that it's a black line around it. So you can go in to your swatches here, and you can go in and fill this with whatever you want. So if I want to fill this with green, for example, that will now be filled with green and it has a black line around it. If I don't want the black line around it, I go to stroke and simply remove it. So that's how fill and stroke works. Now, you were in your Essentials workspace, and that's the one it defaults to on Illustrator. I'm going to switch that Essentials workspace to Layout, because Layout's going to expose some panels that will help me out and just allow me to do more work more quickly. So we have a fill of green and a stroke of nothing. I'm going to go ahead and now draw another shape. We'll use our rounded rectangle, or our ellipse. And now we're going to learn how to draw a little bit more precisely to kind of align and get these objects together. So for example, I'm going to start with the point in the middle of the rounded rectangle. I'm going to hold down my Option key, and here's why. If you just draw, it's going to draw from the point you started drawing on. If you hold down your Option or Alt key, it draws from the center out. And of course, if you hold down your Shift key, you're making a perfect shape. So here's what I want to do. I want to start from the center, hold down my Option or Alt key, and hold down my Shift key and get a perfect shape that lines up perfectly with the object I already drew. So now I have two green shapes on top of each other. I'm going to take the selection tool and move this one up until it covers the top of that shape. And then we'll come back to that in just a moment. But notice as I'm already getting kind of a different look with those two shapes. Now the next thing we're going to do is talk about, here let's go ahead and make another shape. And by the way, we can tear these back off again. And let's go ahead and make a rectangle this time. And you'll notice that the rectangle filled with the last color we used and the last stroke we used. we can go into that fill and we can fill it with whatever we want. So we can pick a different color. You can also pick patterns. These patterns are the ones that came with Illustrator, and there's ways to make your own as well using different shapes. And then of course we have something called a gradient. So what's a gradient and how does that work? You notice you have a gradient tool, and with the gradient tool you can come over and just click on your object and it will make a gradient. It will make the gradient based on whatever your default was or the last gradient you used. So for example, your default is probably white to black. And it will put this bar here as long as the gradient tool is selected so that you can change the gradient. So for example, if I want the gradient to start white a little bit further in, I can just drag the white slider further in. Same thing with the black one. If I want it to be black further over, I can drag the black one further over. What if I don't want it to be black and white? Well, if I hover over the black one and double click, I can then choose a different color. So for example, I can choose orange and go back to the white one, double click, and I could choose yellow, for example. So now I have a nice yellow to orange gradient. What if I want another color in between? Well, you can add as many color, these are called color stops. You can add as many color stops as you want just by simply clicking right below the line when you get the plus sign. So if I double click again, I'll get the ability to now pick a different color. So I can use any color I want to kind of change the look and feel of this gradient. I kind of like the red, and away we go. We can say that this is going to be more red over this way or less red over this way. Now what if I want the gradient to go in a different direction? If you hover outside the bar, you actually get a rotation tool, and we can rotate that gradient to go in a different direction. So now it's going from yellow to orange diagonally. Same thing, I can keep going, line it up and down. Now it's going up and down. I can still move my points, my color stops. I can choose the range of color here. And it's just pretty cool to be able to do this all graphically built right in using the gradient tool. So people ask about fills and strokes and working with gradients all the time, and now we've taken a look at how to do that. So the next thing, and the big one, is going to be number 7, how to transform objects. So let's continue what we started, kind of with the green objects here, and let's talk about transforming, joining, and just making objects into our desired logo or desired effects. Now keep in mind, this is still a circle on top of a rounded rectangle. What I'm going to do is use the selection tool, and I'm going to select both of them just by dragging a selection around them. Now that I've got them both selected, I would love to join them into one. In other words, instead of it being 2 shapes, I just want it to be one shape that looks like this. Well, luckily, there is a shape builder tool. The shape builder tool on the left-hand side here allows me to now, it knows what these shapes are, and I can just simply drag through all 3 to join them into one. So now, just like that, I just took the tool, drug straight down between all 3 objects, and it said, oh, you want to join all 3 of these things? Well, there's really not 3 shapes. It's 2 shapes, but the overlap was counted as the 3rd thing. So you want to basically combine all 3 of those together, just simply drag down. Now when I go to my selection tool, I have one object. Now the next thing I want to do is we're going to start to create a logo that will look very familiar to you. I'm not going to finish it because I don't want to violate any copyright or anything. I'm just going to show you how easily something like this can be done. So we're going to grab our line tool, and we're going to say that it has undo. I forget to deselect sometimes. So deselect. Now we're going to grab our line tool, and we're going to say that our line tool has a white stroke. So white stroke and no fill. And just going to take our line tool, and we're just going to drag a line, hold down our shift key so it's perfectly straight right across the top of this. And now that we've got our line, we're going to go ahead and make it thicker. I don't know, 6 point, maybe 8 point, and make it nice and thick to look like we've separated the 2. But really we didn't. That's just one shape that has a white line across it. Now the next thing we'll do is we'll grab our rounded rectangle. We'll go back to the green color, which is great. That's why we work with swatches. And we get smart guides as we align, as we get near an object to kind of know where we're going to end up lining things up. So we're going to draw kind of a rounded rectangle here. The difference is we don't want a stroke on it at all, so we'll take the stroke off. And now I want to have another one just like it on the other side. So we'll switch back to our selection tool. We could copy and paste. We could duplicate, but the way I always do it is hold down my Option or Alt key and simply start dragging. And if I want it to be perfectly aligned, I hold down my Shift key as well. So now Option Shift or Alt Shift, and that will give me another one that's perfectly the same shape right next to this one. And you're starting to maybe figure out what this might be. I'm not going to call it, but you get the idea. And now we're going to draw one more shape. We're going to use white for our fill, and we're going to make a perfect circle, holding down our Shift key. And once again, we'll grab the Option or Alt key, and we'll just make another one. And it's kind of cute, but you get the idea where that might be headed. All right, so with that, that's how easy it would be to start drawing and manipulating these shapes. Now, just so you know, there are ways that people want to manipulate shapes even further. For example, let's say I take the rectangle with rounded corners and I draw another one, and we fill this one with blue this time. And now I want to go in and I want to manipulate it. How would I do that? I could go in and I could use the selection tool. And the selection tool gives me a bounding box, so I could resize it if I want. I could hold down the Shift key and constrain it to the perfect shape that I had before. I can hover outside of it and rotate it, but that's pretty much it. If I undo the last thing, which was the rotation, I can now go to the free transform tool, and with the free transform tool, I can do a little more. I can go ahead and scale this like I did before. I can rotate it like I did before. But now, if we move this out of the way, we get more options. I can distort the perspective of it. So this will constrain the perspective. So I can kind of make things look like they're going off in the distance. I can also do free distort. So that lets me do one corner at a time. So this is great for quickly and easily starting with a basic shape and then customizing it to be your own using the free transform. So free transform is great for manipulating your objects. Now, last but not least, what if you have some objects that you want to align? So for example, let's draw some shapes here. And again, we'll just quickly duplicate those. Maybe you're starting to create an Olympics logo, I don't know. But let's go ahead and select those now. And if I want to make sure they're all perfectly aligned at the top, we have a nice alignment option right here on the control panel. When you have two or more objects selected, we can just simply say align to the tops. And there they are. Now, what if you notice the spacing is way off, like some are closer, some are not. Well, if I go back to that align option, I also have distribute. So I can say distribute between the centers of those objects. So now they're perfectly aligned at the top and perfectly spaced apart using align and distribute right there on the control panel. So that's align, that's distribute, that's transforming, that's shape builder, that's a lot of things, which basically makes up number 7. Now let's head to number 8. So I'm going to just simply select all and delete, and we'll put our tools away from now because number 8 is placing graphics and tracing them. So we'll use our file menu, place, and you can go out and you can place image-based data. So we can say, I want to bring in a photograph, and that photograph's in this case a JPEG. It could be a PSD, it could be a TIFF, it could be whatever you want. And notice it's going to create a link to the original to start off with. So it's not going to make my Illustrator document any bigger. We'll just place it, and we get the new placement gun in CC. I can simply click, which is going to bring it in at the full size, or I can click and drag, and it will keep it proportionally so I can make it whatever size I want. Now that is raster-based data. Those are pixels, little squares coming from Photoshop, coming from a photograph that's pixel-based. And I can use this, I can say print, I can be done. This could be my flyer, this could be my logo. We're going to add text in a moment, but that's all it would take. However, if I want this to be vector, then I can take it up a notch using what's called image trace. Now image trace activated right here because it saw that I had an image selected. I could also bring up the image trace panel and work with the panel as well. Either way, either the image trace here or the panel. Now the thing about the panel that's nice is you get to pick your preset right off the bat. So since this is a photograph, I can say trace this as a high fidelity photo. But what if I want to trace it as a silhouette and I just want to use the shape? Well, the shape wouldn't really do me much good here because it traced the whole thing as one solid thing. So that's not going to be very good. What about shades of gray? Shades of gray will make it a grayscale image. And that kind of gives me a grayscale. Again, all vector. I could say make it a low fidelity photo. And I can make it a photograph that will mimic the colors as well. And now when I zoom in on this, this is actually vector data. These are mathematical lines and curves at different fills and different shades because this is now vector art. If I zoom back out, then I can say, once I've traced it, I can expand it to say, let me drill down right into the actual shape itself. And I could, for example, select the green background and get rid of the green. And I can go in line by line, path by path, and go in and manipulate, change colors, delete, get rid of the things that I don't want because now this is a vector object. Now I'm going to move my vector version of this object out of the way for a moment. There we go. Let's move that over. And let's place that photo one more time. Let's do File, Place, and let's bring the photo back. And again, let's make it whatever size we want. The other most common thing people want to do when they bring in a photo, even if they don't trace it, they might just want to bring in a photo, but crop it. And there's no crop tool in Illustrator. So what we're going to do is the next best thing. We're going to grab our rectangle tool. We're going to say that it has no fill, no stroke. And we're just going to go ahead and drag out a rectangle for the area that we want to keep right on top of it. So that's how much we want to see. Now we'll just use our selection tool and select both of those. And then we'll go up to our object menu and we'll come down to clipping mask and say make. In other words, use the object on top to mask the object below, effectively cropping it. And you still have the ability, here if we select it, you still have the ability to, here we go, move the flower around inside the cropped area. So just by double clicking, I was able to get to the rectangle that represents the actual flower as opposed to the cropped area. And of course, the cropped area can also be resized. Now that we've made it a mask, it really does effectively work like a cropping tool at this point to be reshaped around the object. So that is placing and tracing images as well as a bonus one thrown in for cropping. Now let's get to number 9, which is working with text. So I'm going to go ahead and blow this away and blow that away. And now we're going to go in and take a look at, let's draw a quick logo. So let's go in, use our ellipse tool, and we're going to fill this with red. And we're just going to go ahead and draw a circle holding down the Shift key. That will give us our perfect red circle. Now I'm going to hold down my Option or Alt key and the Shift key as well and draw another perfect circle from the center out, maybe about that much. Now I'm going to select both of those and using the shape builder one more time, I'm going to go in and say that I want to not join these two together, but I'm going to hold down my Option or Alt key and use the one in the middle to subtract the one on the outside. So I just click and that tells it to subtract the circle from the other circles. Select the whole thing, there we go. And this is actually a hole that's using the cutout. So select the whole thing, we now have an object that is cutting the object out below. So the next thing we want to do is draw our next shape. And now let's draw a rectangle. Sorry about that, folks. I was drilled down into the other object and it was freaking out. Okay, so now we got our object here. And I want to align them to be perfectly on top of each other, perfectly centered. So I'm going to select both. And we're going to say align. And we're going to say from our centers and from our centers. So center vertically, center horizontally, center vertically, and now they're perfectly aligned on top of each other. And now we want to add some text. So the problem is the text I want to add, let's go ahead and add it first. We'll go ahead and grab our type tool, we'll click, and we can go in and just simply type in our text, which is underground. Now that we've added our text, let's go ahead and select, and let's go ahead and change the size. There we go. And we can make it whatever size we want. But what about font? You'll notice that my font is basically Myriad Pro by default, and I can choose any font I want. I can go through my entire font list, and new in Illustrator CC, I can even search based on style. So I can say, well, where are all my heavy fonts? And I can do heavy and then go pick the one I want. But what if I want to use a font I don't actually have yet? So what I would do is go get one. But luckily, it's easier now to go get one, and that is because I'm a Creative Cloud member. I can go to Creative Cloud in the Creative Cloud app, and I can say, go to my fonts and browse fonts on Typekit. That will take me to the Typekit library on the web, and I can then go in and search for the kind of font I want. I want a sans serif font, so that will narrow it down to just my sans serifs, and I can go and pick a nice underground looking font. So for example, maybe I want, let's load a few more. Let's see what else we've got here. I don't know, I kind of like Tenso. So I'm going to go ahead and click Use Fonts. And then I can say Sync Selected Fonts. So sync Tenso to my computer. Now in a moment, you'll see the Creative Cloud logo activate, letting me know that it's basically syncing that data. So we'll see a couple blue arrows when that happens. And when that happens, by the way, it will also alert me with a little message letting me know that those fonts have been synced. So I don't have to wait for this. I can close it, and I can head back to, there's my little sync icon, and my little message comes up saying I got 4 new fonts. Now I can head back to Illustrator, and the beauty of it is, because of the integration with Creative Cloud and Typekit, I don't have to quit Illustrator. All I have to do is go in now, scroll down to my T's, and there is the Tenso font. I can go ahead and choose whichever one I want. There's the bold, and now I can pick that up and put it right on top of my object. Of course, I want that to stand out more, so we'll just grab a different fill color, such as white, and now that's my underground logo. Now, of course, I can go in, select this as an object. I can use free transform. I could rotate the whole thing. I could distort it. I could do whatever I needed to do to kind of make my logo a little cooler than the next person's logo. But you get the idea. So that's how quickly and easily we can add text. We can fill the text with colors. We can create outlines. We can do all kinds of cool transitions with our text. For example, even using the new touch type feature. So I can say, for example, use the word touch. We can select it. We can make it nice and large. Nice and large. How about 300? And let's make our frame bigger. Make our frame much bigger. There we go. There's our touch type. And once we pick a color for that touch type, we can actually go in. Here, let's move our logo out of the way a bit. Bring our type down. There we go. And using the new touch type feature, which is type tool, touch type tool, we can now click on the individual letters and manipulate them. So I can, for example, move that one over. I can rotate or scale the O and rotate the O a little bit more, move that in, and create just that easily a quick custom logo for my client based on just rotating one of the characters or perhaps moving one of the characters up over a little bit more. They get their new touch type logo. And of course, we can make the characters a little skinnier and perhaps even a little taller. And quickly, I can make a type treatment that would have required me to break up all these individual characters separately, or all these characters and make them separate in order to get that ability. But now, with touch type, it is still one word. I can select the whole thing and apply a different color, different font, different size, whatever I want to the whole thing. because it is still technically one word. So that's touch type, that's working with text, creating our logo. Last but not least, very quickly, and that is output. So once you're done with all this, then what? So we've got our nice touch underground flower logo, and now we want to save it. So if I choose save, that will bring up the save dialog box, and I can then just save it. And notice it's going to save it in AI format by default, so that I could always open this back up and continue working on it. It's going to save it in the latest format by default, which in my case is Illustrator CC version 17. But Illustrator has had a long history of being able to save backwards. As a matter of fact, it can save all the way back to Illustrator 3. That's from the late 80s, early 90s, folks. That's quite a long ways back. CS all the way through CS6. So if you're working with anyone with an older version of Illustrator, you could save it down to their version and hand them the document. Now, the other thing is that what if you want to save this in a format that someone can use and they're not using the latest and greatest tools? You can say File, Save As, and you could save it, for example, as an EPS file, which is a generic vector format. That's an industry standard years ago, EPS. Now, of course, if you're going to put this on the web, because remember this was going to be a web document to begin with, we could just simply say Save for Web, and that will bring up the Save for Web dialog box where we could optimize the size of it. So we could say, no, we don't need it to be quite that big. Maybe we don't want it to be 600 on the width, and it will scale it down. And we can make a nice ping graphic for it, and it will give us the size that it's going to make it. And it's going to be 35K in this case, which is pretty acceptable on the web today. So there we go. We have a nice crisp logo using the web format that we started with in the very beginning, the web profile that will align the objects to the underlying grid. So that would be how we'd save to open up in Illustrator, save it for the web, save it to give someone else in an older format, and save to the web, save it in an older format, and save it in a generic format, which is EPS. Last but not least, this kind of got added after Illustrator CC was released because Illustrator gets, frequent updates. And that's the ability to package. So for example, I could save this out as my Illustrator file. And because I, may have placed a logo or placed that flower or wanted to work on something that people would be able to work on, with all the elements that I used, I could say package and package this whole thing up, which it will collect all the links, copy the fonts, and create a report out on my desktop. And there's the package. It's done. Show the package, and there's all the stuff needed to work on this document. So packaging, new feature in Illustrator CC, and that is it. Those are my 10 things for Illustrator users. So if you're new to Illustrator, hopefully you got something out of this. Hopefully you learned that Illustrator is not hard to get into. There's a lot you can do, but that's great because there's a lot you can do. Take care, and we'll catch you on the next one.